Have you ever wondered how stores calculate discounts or how salaries, population, and prices increase over time? What does it really mean when something is 20% off or increased by 15%? In this lesson, you'll learn how percentages work and how to solve problems involving percentage increase and percentage decrease. Let's get started. Before we talk about increase and decrease, let's first understand the word percent. The word percent means per hundred. Think of it this way. If I say 25%, I simply mean 25 out of every 100. If I say 50%, that means 50 out of every 100. And if I say 100%, that means the entire amount or the whole. Percentages are everywhere. We see them in discounts, grades, interest rates, taxes, election results, and even social media statistics. That's why understanding percentages is an important life skill. Before solving percentage problems, we need to know three important concepts: the rate, the base, and the percentage. Let's look at them one at a time. The rate is the percent value. Whenever you see a number followed by a percent sign, that's usually the rate. For example, 10%, 25%, 64%, 80%. These are all rates. Think of the rate as telling us how much of something we're talking about. The base is the whole amount, the total, the complete value. In percentage problems, the base always represents 100%. Think of a whole pizza. Before anyone takes a slice, the entire pizza is the base. The whole pizza represents 100%. The percentage is the part of the whole. Going back to our pizza example, if the pizza has 8 slices and you eat 2 slices, those 2 slices are the percentage. They are only a part of the whole pizza. So remember, base equals the whole, percentage equals the part. Rate equals the percent value. Now here's a shortcut that many students love. It's called the triangle model. At the top is P for percentage. At the bottom are B for base and R for rate. When percentage is on top, it tells us percentage equals base times rate. P equals B times R. If we're solving for the rate, rate equals percentage divided by base. And if we're solving for the base equals percentage divided by rate. This triangle model helps us remember which operation to use for solving. Let's try a problem. If 32 is 64% of a number, what is the number? The first thing we should do is identify the given values. The problem says 32 is 64% of a number. Ask yourself, is 32 the whole amount? No, it is only part of the amount. Therefore, 32 is the percentage. Next, 64% is clearly the rate because it has a percent sign. The unknown number is the base. Now we have percentage equals 32, rate equals 64%, base equals unknown. Since we are solving for the base, we use base equals percentage divided by rate. But wait, before dividing, we must convert the rate into decimal form. So we divide 64% by 100%. 64% becomes 0.64. Now divide. 32 divided by 0.64 equals 50. Therefore, the number is 50. Now let's try another problem. What percent of 260 is 13? As always, let's begin by identifying the values given in the problem. We know that 13 is the part of the whole, so it represents the percentage. The number 260 represents the entire amount, so it is the base. The value we are looking for is the percent itself, which means the rate is unknown. Therefore, we have percentage equals 13, base equals 260, rate equals unknown. Since we are solving for the rate, we will use the formula, rate equals percentage divided by base. Now substitute the given values. Rate equals 13 divided by 260. Performing the division gives us 0.05. Notice that our answer is in decimal form. However, the problem is asking for a percent. To convert a decimal into a percent, we multiply by 100. So 0.05 times 100 equals 5%. Therefore, 13 is 5% of 260. And that's our final answer. So what does this have to do with percentage increase and decrease? Great question. Now that we understand percentages, we're ready to discuss percentage change. Percentage change simply describes how much a value decreases or increases compared to its original value. There are only two possibilities. The value gets smaller or the value gets bigger. Let's start with percentage decrease. A percentage decrease happens when a value becomes smaller than its original value. Examples include store discounts, markdown sales, and depreciation of vehicles. When something decreases, we remove a certain percentage from the original amount. Before solving, let's look at the formula. Final value equals initial value times 100% minus percentage decrease. What does this formula mean? The initial value is the original amount. The percentage decrease is the amount being removed. Since we're removing a percentage, we subtract it from 100%. The result tells us what percentage of the original amount remains. Let's try an example. A shirt costs 1,000 pesos. The store offers a 20% discount. What is the new price? First, let's identify the given information. The original price is 1,000 pesos. The percentage decrease is 20%. Using our formula, final value equals initial value times 100% minus percentage decrease. Substitute the values. Final value equals 1,000 pesos times 100% minus 20%. Now simplify what's inside the parentheses. 100% minus 20% equals 80%. So we have final value equals 1,000 pesos times 80%. Before multiplying, convert the percentage into decimal form. We divide 80 by 180% becomes 0.80. Now multiply 1,000 pesos times 0.80 equals 800 pesos. Therefore, the new price of the shirt is 800 pesos. Let's think about what happened. The store removed 20% of the original price. That's why the final amount became smaller. This is an example of percentage decrease. Now let's move on to the opposite situation. Instead of decreasing, what if a value becomes larger? This is called percentage increase. Percentage increase happens when a value grows or becomes greater than its original amount. Examples include salary increases, population growth, and appreciation of land value. To solve percentage increase problems, we use the formula final value equals initial value times 100% plus percentage increase. Notice the difference. For percentage decrease, we subtract. For percentage increase, we add. Why? Because we're adding extra value to the original amount. Suppose Maria earns 10,000 pesos per month. Her employer gives her a 15% salary increase. What is her new salary? Let's identify the given values. Initial value equals 10,000 pesos. Percentage increase equals 15%. Now let's substitute these values into the formula. Final value equals 10,000 pesos times 100% plus 15%. Simplify the expression inside the parentheses. 100% plus 15% equals 115%. Now rewrite the equation. Final value equals 10,000 pesos times 115%. Convert 115% into decimal form. We divide the 115% by 100%. 115% becomes 1.15. Now multiply. 10,000 pesos times 1.15 equals 11,500 pesos. Therefore, Maria's new salary is 11,500 pesos. Let's interpret our answer. Maria originally earned 10,000 pesos. After receiving a 15% increase, her salary became 11,500 pesos. Since the amount became larger, this is a percentage increase. Now that we have learned about rate, base, percentage, percentage decrease, and percentage increase, let's move on to another important application of percentages called percent change. In many real-life situations, we are not asked to find a percentage of a number or determine the whole amount. Instead, we are often interested in finding out how much a value has changed compared to its original value. For example, suppose the price of a cell phone was originally 10,000 pesos and later became 12,000 pesos. Or perhaps a student's allowance increased from 500 pesos to 600 pesos. In these situations, the question is not, what is the new value? The new value is already given. Instead, the question becomes, by what percent did the value change? In other words, we want to know how large the change is compared to where we started. This is exactly what percent change helps us measure. Percent change tells us the percentage by which a quantity has increased or decreased relative to its original value. To find the percent change, We use the formula. Percent change equals amount of change divided by original amount times 100%. At first glance, this formula may seem complicated, but let's break it down into smaller parts. The first thing we need to find is the amount of change. The amount of change simply tells us how much the value changed. To find it, we subtract the initial value from the final value. So we use the formula. Amount of change equals final value minus initial value. Let's think about what this means. The initial value is the starting amount before any change occurred. The final value is the amount after the change occurred. When we subtract these two values, we obtain the difference between them. That difference is called the amount of change. Once we know the amount of change, we compare it to the original amount. Why do we compare it to the original amount? Because the significance of a change depends on where we started. Let's look at an example. Suppose a student's allowance increased from 500 pesos to 600 pesos. What is the percent change? First, identify the values. Initial value equals 500 pesos. Final value equals 600 pesos. Next, find the amount of change. Amount of change equals final value minus initial value. Amount of change equals 600 pesos minus 500 pesos. Amount of change equals 100 pesos. Now substitute the values into the percent change formula. Percent change equals amount of change divided by original amount times 100%. Percent change equals 100 pesos divided by 500 pesos times 100%. Percent change equals 0.20 times 100%. Percent change equals 20%. Therefore, the percent change is 20%. This means that the allowance changed by an amount equal to 20% of its original value. Before we end, let's review what we learned today. The rate is the percent value. The base is the whole amount. The percentage is a part of the whole. Percentage increase makes a value larger. Percentage decrease makes a value smaller. And percent change tells us how much a value changed compared to its original amount. And that's it for today's lesson on percentage increase and percentage decrease. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your classmates. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.